Árboles lloran por lluvia y montañas por aire, así lloran los mis ojos por ti, querida amante.
Yo me llamo Rachel, de familia sé Amado y ahora estoy casada con Bortnik. My name in English is Rachel. Some people still call me Rachel, which is the correct way of calling me. And my family name is Amado, from my father. And now I'm married to an Ashkenazi named Bortnik, so my name is Rachel Bortnik in English. I was born in Izmir, Turkey in 1938. I grew up speaking Spanish at home. When I say Spanish, it is what is called Ladino these days. Judeo-Spanish is the more correct term. It is our Spanish dialect. It's Castilian, essentially, except that it's 15th century Castilian with lots of other words mixed in, mainly from Turkish, some from Hebrew, a few from French. Under the Turkish Republic, Jews began to go to Turkish public schools. My parents first sent me to a Jewish school, which was just across the street, called the Bnei Brit School. And later, in the 4th grade, I transferred to a Turkish public school. Of course, my Turkish became much like the native Turks. My mother knew very little Turkish, just barely enough to get along to do her shopping. So at home, we continued to speak Spanish. Our ancestors are those Jews that were expelled from Spain in 1492. And at the time of the expulsion, there were very few places that the Jews could go to. But the Ottoman Sultan of the time, who was Bayezid II, actually invited these refugees to come and settle in his empire, and has reportedly said, "I am the smart one for getting this treasure from Spain." We're very conscious and very proud of the fact that our roots are in Spain. This so-called Golden Age, mostly under Arab rule in Spain, produced many scholars in different fields, many poets. Yehuda Halevi is one that comes to mind right away. The worst times actually happened under Christian rule in Spain. 1391, there were massacres of Jews, there were forced conversions. Many Jews under duress converted into Christianity, but were at heart Jews and continued to practice Judaism secretly. And they called these people marranos, meaning swine actually, because they were insincere converts. There are stories told of families that kept their keys to the houses in their cities in Spain, totally expecting that if they never went back, certainly their children or grandchildren would be going back. The fact of the matter, unfortunately, is that the expulsion was not officially rescinded until 1968. Although Jews were going back to Spain a few years before that, it was not official, and they could not build their synagogues and so on in Spain until 1968. So those families waited a long time, if ever they did go back. My mother's family, their last name was Algranti, that is my grandfather's last name, was Algranti, which was changed from Algranati, which I think means that they came from Granada. My paternal grandfather was Samuel Amado, and he used to go around to the villages selling insurance, and my father used to tell me that when he was young he used to go along with him. This grandfather dressed typically Turkish. He wore a fez and a jubbe, that's like a kaftan. This was not typical of most Jews. Most Jews dressed European style in the cities, and that distinguished them from the Muslims. My father told me stories of visiting Turkish villages and the hospitality of the Turkish villagers and all the food that they used to offer them, and they even stayed overnight in some of those houses. This same grandfather was also a very religious man. My father's family had French citizenship for a long time under the Ottoman Empire. And he used to say that his family came from Bayonne in France. Now Bayonne was, I learned later as I did some study of Sephardic history, that Bayonne was a community of ex-Marranos that had escaped from Spain through the Pyrenees, and it's a city on the France-Spain border. And so I suspect that the Amados were one of those families that had converted to Catholicism. But then when the Inquisition came and things got worse for them, then they fled. And then they eventually found their way to Turkey. Turkey was a good place for these people to come. Everybody had religious freedom, even communal freedom.
My name is Esther Levy. I was born in Egypt. My parents came from Turkey, Izmir.
The same city.
Same city as Rachel. And we kept, even though that we were living in Egypt, we kept the same traditions, the same customs, like the Turkish people. Same food.
First of all, my mother would get up real early and start preparing these things, like burekas and boyos, that is another kind of filled dough thing. So she used to get up real early to prepare these things. And we would get ready for the bath. We used to go to the Turkish bath, which took most of the day. We used to take these prepared things to the bath, so we would eat after the bath, right there in the bathhouse. And that was in itself a...
On Friday?
Yeah, we used to take burekas and roskas and things like that to the bath.
Well,
when I was little. Later on, as I said, we were doing it at home. But so we prepared that way, and all the food for Saturday was cooked from Friday. And so we all, after we took our bath, we used to say Yatumimu Shabbat.
It's already Shabbat.
We're ready for the Shabbat. But Saturday morning, the men all went to the synagogue before breakfast, and then when they came out around 10:30 or so, and we had a big spread, like a brunch, of these things that were prepared beforehand. We had a woman who made a fire for us for Saturday because we couldn't light a fire. Well, especially in the winter. We used to heat our homes either with wood or coal-burning stoves or with open fires, like brazier fires that would be lit outdoors, and then when it was nice and hot, they would bring it indoors for warming. And every house had a copper or brass holder for tandoor, we used to call it. And this, since we didn't light fires, there used to be Turkish women in the morning, early morning, calling Atesh, which means fire, fire. They knew that the Jewish women would call them, and they would, and I'd pay them later because we wouldn't pay them. They'd come back Sunday or Monday.
Can we put this in the oven
Yes.
already?
The hard-boiled eggs that Esther talked about, that we usually eat with burekas, is not a regular, ordinary hard-boiled egg. It's what we call huevos haminados. You're probably familiar with the word hamin, which is Hebrew, I think, for something that is cooked for a long time for Friday. You know, the Ashkenaz have something like this too, that they start cooking from Friday and just stays on the fire until Saturday, and you're ready to eat it. Well, our people used to leave eggs to cook for a long time like this. And as a result, the eggs, the white part of the eggs got brown. So, and the yolk had a very special flavor. And this is what we call huevos haminados, and this is what is traditionally eaten with the burekas to go along with it.
Okay.
It's oh, excuse me, I forgot to do that. Okay. There were always several women in the household. There was the mother-in-law for sure, and the
She was the chef.
the daughter-in-law, at least. Then there was a sister-in-law, and there was a maid. So there were always women, and women always did things together. And I always say that's why the women developed all these songs that they sung that while they were doing things together, you know, or even the laundry. The maids or the people who were doing it. It's such a boring job. They would sing along as they did it.
Si la mar era de leche, los barquitos de canela, yo me mancharía entera por salvarla mi bandiera. Yo me mancharía entera por salvarla mi bandiera. Dame la mano, paloma, para subir al tu nido. Maldicha que duerme sola, vengo a dormir contigo. Maldicha que duerme sola, vengo a dormir contigo. No me lleves tu al muelle, en el muelle hay una ventana, en la ventana hay una isla que a los marineros llama. En la ventana hay una isla que a los marineros llama.
There were two kinds of vendors. One was the kind that went up and down the street and yelled or chanted their wares, whatever they were selling. Usually these were vegetable, fruit, and fish salesmen. Then there were other people who had stores who would send their little young workers to get orders as to what we wanted. One of these was the butcher, the kosher butcher. This young man would come and ask my mother, as he did to all the other ladies, what we wanted this week. And my mother would give her order. I remember things like liver and brain were hard to get because the butcher will say, "What? We don't have any. What do you want? A cow only has one of these things, and who shall I give it first to?" An eggman, who was a Jewish man who used to come to the house, he had chicken somewhere, I guess, and he used to come with big wire baskets full of eggs. And I will never forget him. His name was Sabetai. And he used to announce himself by crackling like an egg. Quack, 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 you know? And as children, we used to love that, of course, come down and ask our mother how many eggs you want today, you know, and bring our own wire basket, which was smaller, and he would put them in. And then we had a wine man, a Jewish wine man, who made kosher wine and sold us kosher wine, especially for Passover. That was a big deal, buying the wine from this man. And sometimes his wine would turn to vinegar and we would be without wine. It was a big thing. When we visited a family, we used to get dressed up. And the women, it was almost a tradition among women that they had to go visit each other on certain days. And you did not wait for people to invite you. What you would say is, we would like to come and visit you. Which day can we come? And the hostess would say which day you could come. And then the mothers would arrange 3, 4 women, whoever, with their children. They would dress us up, bathe us, dress us up, put our ribbons in our hair, and go to visit, visitas we called them. And in these visitas, it was a very set pattern of serving. After we sat down, and the women kissed and all that, then we sat down and made ourselves comfortable. Immediately there would be a tray, which we call the tavla, de dulce. That is a tray with 2 different kinds of sweets that were home prepared. Either the young lady of the family or sometimes the maid. We used to have Jewish maids. They would bring them to serve the ladies. And the woman would take either one of the sweets, whichever she preferred. She would pick up a spoon and take a piece of the charope, let's say, and a glass of water. And before she would eat it, she would wish good things to the woman and the family and the house, and may we be present in your daughter's weddings, and you should always serve sweet things. Sweetness was very symbolic because you only served sweets in happy occasions. You would not serve sweets in sad occasions. Then after all these wishes, she would eat it and put the fork or spoon in that special place, drink the water, put it back, and then the person would go to the next person who would in turn repeat the same ceremony. And finally the children got some too. And then as time went on, they would serve Turkish coffee with cookies or something else. Turkish coffee was another ceremony, because again they would wish, when you took the little cup of Turkish coffee, the woman would say, cafés de alegría. That means coffees of happiness, it should be, because coffee is something that is served on sad occasions. So this coffee should be always for happy occasions. And then after everybody drank the coffee, usually they'd turn it upside down on the saucer, and they would see, after a few minutes, they'd turn it right side up again, and the grounds would form certain patterns, and invariably there would be somebody who claimed that they knew how to tell fortune by reading these grounds. Y aquí mira, aquí hay como camino, es que vas a salir a viaje. And they'd say, oh, I see, there is a road, you're going to go on a trip. So you will have good fortune, your husband's business will go well, or something like that. It was a lot of fun. Women had their specific roles in Sephardic life, as they had, I think, in all traditional Jewish life. The place of the woman was in the home. Every woman got married. Marriages used to be arranged. They were not in my generation, nor certainly not now. But my parents' marriage was arranged. My father was 20 years older than my mother, and that was no problem. Men usually were older than the women. The women were raised from childhood to be housewives, and that means doing all kinds of handiwork, as well as the knowing how to take care of a house and cooking and so on. And all Sephardic women knew how to embroider and sew and knit. I learned knitting before I could do anything else, probably. I don't even remember when I first picked up my first pair of needles, but I remember making little things for my dolls. The women who had girl children used to start preparing their trousseau, the things that they would need when they would be married. From very early on, they'd start embroidering, and women used to get together in the afternoons and embroider and prepare for this trousseau. We had a special ceremony before the wedding in which you exhibited everything that you had in your trousseau. That was a celebration in itself. We called it Ashugar, we laid all the embroidered things around, and people came and saw it, and we served sweets and the whole thing. One of the things that sometimes causes a problem when we have shall we call it an intermarriage between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, is that the Sephardic people have a very definite and set way of naming babies. The first male child is always named after the paternal grandfather, and the first female child after the paternal grandmother, and then the mother's family, the maternal grandfather and grandmother, and so on. If this somebody is alive, that person is very honored. Well, this causes a problem among Ashkenazim, who have the superstition, which they think is a Jewish law, that you don't name babies after living people. The fact is, it's not a Jewish law, it's simply a superstition. And the Sephardic people don't believe in that superstition. We have others of our own. In our case, Joseph was both my father-in-law's name and my own father's name. So we couldn't name anybody Joseph. But it was all right with my father, because my brother's baby was named, or would be named, he wasn't born yet, Joseph. So, and he is named Joseph, and he carries the last name too, so he didn't mind that. He respected the fact that these Jewish people believe in that, so that's okay. For girls too, Sephardic people had the ceremony on the 7th day of the birth, and it's called Siete Candelas. They lit 7 candles. They sang Pizmonim, songs from the prayer book. The term for this baby naming, girl baby naming, is called fadar, or las fadas, which I read once is something that can be traced back to Spain. Fadas in Spanish means fairies, and there was a Spanish superstition that fairies protected little girls. So from there, somehow we came to call this ceremony Las Fadas. Growing up in Turkey, I thought Spanish is the Jewish language. That's what all the Jews spoke. Then I came to this country. I came to St. Louis, Missouri, where there were no Sephardim. And the Jews, the 60,000 Jews that lived there, most of them had never even heard of Sephardic people, let alone believe that you could be Jewish and not be from a Yiddish-speaking background. The first Jewish family I met asked me if I spoke Yiddish, and I said no. And she said, well, surely your parents speak Yiddish. And I said, no, I have never heard Yiddish in my life. And she said, what kind of a Jew are you? The first holiday that I celebrated here was Hanukkah, and I had never seen a dreidel. And I didn't know what latkes were. We have our own foods for the holidays, and the Jews here didn't know anything about it. So my whole concept of what being a Jew meant was shaken. And it was very, very disturbing, and I felt very lonely, to tell you the truth, because when I came, my father told me that the first thing I should do should be meet Jewish families in America. And I did that, and they doubted that I was Jewish, and they were not the kind of Jews that I was familiar with. If I had stayed in Turkey, my parents wouldn't have let me go to the university, because I would have had to leave town and go to Istanbul, and they just wouldn't do it. They didn't think it was necessary, and girls just didn't do it. But having been handed the scholarship and the opportunity to go to America and see the world, they were more willing to do it, although it was not easy to convince them. There are between 20 and 25,000 Jews left in Turkey today. The Turkish Jews today are very much like Turks. They're totally assimilated. They speak only Turkish, so the young generation feels more Turkish, whereas my generation felt more Jewish as distinct from the Turks. There are only 1,800 Jews left in my city, from maybe 25,000 when I lived there. Most of these people went to Israel. But they have a very solid Jewish life still in Turkey, with all the institutions still in operation, helping the poor and taking care of synagogues and institutions, Jewish schools, Jewish youth clubs. It's very sad, because my generation was the last one to speak the language fluently. When I had the children, I wasn't aware of what was happening. I thought, oh, well, you know, Turkey's there, the Sephardic people are there. When they're older, they'll go and they'll find this world that I left behind just the way I left it. It didn't happen that way. My husband speaks only English, so I could only speak English with him, and the children learned only English. However, I don't think that we're ready to bury this language yet. It will live on, at least in our songs. There's a renewed interest in learning these old songs, some of which date back to Spain, some of which were composed in the diaspora, as we call it, the Ottoman Empire. This is my song. This is my favorite.
The trees cry for rain and the mountains for
Yeah,
wind.
but I especially like this, what do you call this part? The two line, the refrain, because it's sort of my life story.
Oh.
And
Tell me
tierras
what will become of me. I will die in a strange land. Oh! Árboles lloran por lluvias y montañas por aires. Ansí lloran los mis hoyos por ti, que
tierras ajenas, yo me voy morir.
Okay. Ajenas. Je. I think it sounds like je. Je.
Okay, so more je.
Yeah, it's ajenas.
Blanca sos, blanca vistes, blanca la tu figura. Blancas flores caen de ti, de la tu hermosura. Blancas flores caen de ti, de la tu hermosura.
Beautiful.
Tu madre cuando te parió y te